Hey everyone, I'm very excited today to be here to announce that I'm going to be making 2 videos in partnership with, with Barton Kane! For this experiment, I'm going to be making 2 different videos. The first is going to be different types of cane using my preferred shape, Rieger 1A. The second video is going to be using different shapes in all one type of cane. My preferred type is Rigati. So let me explain a little bit of the difference between the tools and why I chose Barton Cane to help me with this experiment. Basically, I have a set of 4 or 5 different machines that are hand operated that I use to make all of my cane that go into ACDC reeds. I only use one type of cane and I only use one shape. For this experiment, I'd like to use 7 different types of cane and 10 different shapes. Each shaper itself is probably $100, depending on where you get it from, and they're all different types. Some shapers are folded, some shapers are flat. Each type of cane is, to go through my specific process of processing cane, it would take me months to get through multiple kilos of cane from tube cane to their finished product, and I'd have to buy 10 different types of cane. So that's a lot of money and an investment right there. To take all of that stress out of the experiment, I went to Barton Cane and asked them if they would give me a specific order of 3 pieces of each type of cane and each shape of cane so that I could experiment. So I've got like 48 different pieces of cane here that I get to experiment with, which is phenomenal. I'm very excited. The difference between my process and Barton Cane's is that Barton Cane has developed specific machines that do the same thing as the hand-operated machines, but they're actually engineered specifically for this purpose. So there's less human error, like chipping off the edge of a piece of cane when you're shaping or something like that. Quality of the cane is very consistent, so it's much more consistent than you would get from a bunch of different tools and a bunch of different processes. So that's why I'm using Barton Cane, because I'm getting that consistency that I want. I would highly recommend their cane, and I'll show you why in this video. It's great for all bassoonists to experiment with. If you're just looking for one shape or one type of cane, or you're wanting to streamline like 3 different shapes for one type of cane, you can order like 5 pieces of each and just experiment with those specific types that you want. They also sell factory seconds, which are like imperfect pieces of cane that have minor imperfections that you can buy for half price, which is a phenomenal way to experiment with cane in general. Some constants for this experiment are Barton Cane's processing, me as the maker, my environment and tools, 3 reeds of each cane type will be made, and making sure to complete each step with each reed in one session. So for example, like no session will be paused one day and picked up the next. I'm going to be finishing each step all in one so that there's no inconsistencies between the process. The only variable in this experiment is going to be the cane types. So without further ado, let's get to it. And now for the results of the great Barton cane experiment. Well, I've got a bunch of observations to share with you throughout the forming and scraping and playtesting process, so here we go. First off, during the forming process, I wanted to share with you my observations of how many cracks I got first past the second wire and second into the blade. There was only one crack that happened into the blade, and it was very subtle. It was in Donzi cane. The other cracks that happened past the second wire were mainly in Medir, Glotan, and Donati. Lavoro, Gonzalez, and Donzi only had one crack up past the second wire, and then Ragati had 0 cracks whatsoever. So my question, though, after observing that is, does that actually make a difference in the end results of the reed? I guess we'll see. The next observation I made was the actual measurements of the cane once the blank was formed and the tip was cut. I thought this was really interesting because I usually do this with my own reeds just to make sure that I'm getting the consistency that I want. I know exactly how much cane I need to take off the reed from the blank after the blank forming process. And so I just wanted to make sure I wasn't taking off too much throughout this process of the first and second scrapes. So I measured all of every little, half millimeter to make sure that I was getting good results on all of my reeds. So I did notice that even though these were all manufactured by the same company and they all have the same gouge, the same profile, and the same shape, they all ended up a little slightly different in their measurements. So I wrote down all the measurements of all the types of cane, and I found that Medir tended to be thinner than most, and Donati tended to be thicker than most. All the other ones were totally in the mid-range. They were all kind of similar. But those two I thought were notable. Another thing I noticed during this process was that I didn't really need to do a ton of scraping, which is super awesome. Like, I usually end up having to do a lot of scraping on my reeds because my profile is just slightly different. My tip tends to be really thick compared to Barton cane, and the back of the cane tends to be right dead on where I want it to be. So I found that I didn't have to do as much scraping at the tip as I normally do on my reeds. All right, so let's do our play testing. So all of these reeds have been scraped exactly the same measurements through scrape 2 to the best of my ability. And I've got 3 of each reed here, so I'm going to go ahead and play all of them and see what they sound like. Number 1 is Lavoro. I felt that Lavoro was very consistent. It felt very similar to the Rigatti and the Gonzales, but it was just a little bit harder than the Rigatti and a little bit softer than Gonzales. So kind of like middle of the road hardness, and it really felt very consistent in tone quality and all that. So very good. Number 2, Donzi. Surprising, I know. I felt this one was really consistent in tone quality, and it actually got more of a darker tone quality that I really like. Some people don't like that as much, but if you want it brighter, you can just scrape it a little bit more, and it won't lose the intonation or the response. But yeah, I felt like Donzi was a really, really well-rounded type of cane to use, for sure. Surprising to me. All right, number 3, Rigatti. Of course, I already used Rigatti cane, but I felt like this was a little, these 3 reeds were just a little bit less consistent than Gonzales Lavoro and Donzi. But I also felt like it was still vibrant and bright the way that I like my reeds to vibrate. So, I felt like that was a really consistent part of the reed quality. Number 4 was Gonzales. I felt that Gonzales felt the same as Rigatti, but it had kind of a middle vibrancy, not as bright, but it did feel a little bit harder than Rigatti as well. Still very consistent. Number 5 was Glow Tan. I've tried Glow Tan before, and I definitely didn't like it, so I'm actually kind of surprised that it came before other types of cane, that it's ranked higher. But I definitely felt like Glow Tan was light, bright, and even a little bit flat. So I actually feel like Glow Tan might be a good contender to answer my question about maybe using a different type of cane for beginner reeds. So that might be an interesting experiment to try Glow Tan for my beginner reeds instead of Rigatti. Number 6 was Donati. I felt that Donati was really inconsistent throughout the 3 reeds that I tried, and it felt a bit choked and muffled. I actually had to open up the first wire for these reeds significantly, and all the other ones I didn't have to do that. So I kind of felt like it was not really the type of cane that I would like to use for the vibrancy that I would like to get, but it still had the same response in all registers that all the other reeds had. So not a bad type of cane, just not my preference. And finally, number 7. Lowest on my list was Madeir cane. I felt like it was pretty inconsistent, and it's known to be a very soft cane, so I kind of expected it to be pretty low on my list. But Madeir specifically just felt really soft to me, to the point where it didn't really get that hard vibrancy that I like in my reeds. It did get the response in all registers, which is great, but it definitely wasn't. It didn't have that resonance that I was looking for. So I felt like the inconsistency combined with the low tone quality, I just didn't feel like it worked for this shape, especially for my kind of cane, for my kind of reed. All right, well, there you have it. All of these reeds played in all registers, responded very well. So I know that the shape does really well in all kinds of cane. That's great to know. But in general, I might try out using Lavoro cane or Donzi cane, my number 1 and 2 choices. I felt like those were really, really well-rounded kinds of cane. I didn't think that those 2 kinds of cane were so differently structured from Rigatti that it would change the way my reeds sound in my own business. So if I ever did have to make reeds with a different type of cane, I don't think it would really make that much of a difference if I chose Donzi or Lavoro cane. So that's good to know. The one that I might experiment with, trying to figure out if I can make my beginner reeds a little bit differently, I would like to experiment with Glow Tan to see if I can make some beginner reeds out of that, because I think it was light enough, it was easy to play with the way that I scrape, that I think it would be a really good contender for trying to make my beginner reeds out of that. There you have it, the Great Barton Cane Experiment Part 1. Next video up will be on different shapes. I have 10 different shapes to show you, so I'm really excited to show you that. And thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and that it was helpful. Happy bassooning!